So as I had promised in the description of this webinar, we are going to talk about Boeing's 737 MAX debacle. Can you type yes if you're aware of this news story? Are you aware of this news story about Boeing? Yes or no? You can type your answers. Great. So almost everyone seems to be aware of this story. So in March 2019, Boeing 737 MAX airplanes were grounded worldwide. Why? Because 346 people died in two separate crashes. So at that point of time, there were more than 387 flights, 387 airplanes that were serving 8,600 flights for different airlines. All of them were grounded, causing Boeing's reputation. They had to suspend the production of the 737 MAX. So the question is, could they have avoided this crisis and tragedy? So go back to 6 months earlier, in November of 2018, Boeing had launched the new automated flight control system for the 737 MAX. So later in the post-mortem done by both the FAA and the NTSB, they found that many employees had serious concerns about the automated flight control system. But they did not feel safe enough to voice their concerns, especially against the backdrop of delivery timeline and pressures of a multi-billion dollar project, each airplane. So later in the interviews, employees said that they were afraid to speak up as they thought that they might lose their job. Remember, we talked about people's perceptions. They are worse than the reality. So I don't think it would be likely that this would happen at Boeing. Whether this would really happen or not, it clearly shows that how lack of psychological safety can sometimes end up in disastrous results. Good then. How many of you heard of a company called Pixar? Type yes. Have you heard of a company called Pixar, the animation studio? If not, I'm pretty sure you have seen some of these movies for yourself or a children or some of these a nephew or a niece. So Pixar pioneered the animated movies at the box office. Their first movie was Toy Story in 1995. So since 1995, they have produced 21 more movies. All of them have been commercial success and also well-liked. So in an unpredictable movie industry, how does Pixar do it? So one of the reasons is the environment of psychological safety created by Pixar co-founder, who? Ed Catmull. So when the movie is in its early stage, a group of directors and storytellers, they get together and they watch the early run of the movie together. They eat lunch together, and then they provide candid feedback to the director, what worked and what did not. So now this sounds simple, but it's not easy. So as Ed Catmull admits, early on, all our movies suck. But with enough iterations and candid feedback, the final product is usually amazing. So when people feel psychologically safe enough to contribute their insights, opinions, suggestions, the knowledge in the room increases exponentially. Not, 1 plus 1 is 2, but 1 plus 1 would be 3, 5, or 10. Why? Because people build on each other's observations and suggestions and creates new value. And this is true for all kinds of organizations in the 21st century. So we took two examples, one of the Boeing and another one with Pixar. So now take a look at all these companies, Barry Miller, Tata Group, Bridgewater, Google X, now it's only called X, Intuit, the software maker, Personal Finance, and GMR Infrastructure, who manages the Hyderabad, Delhi, and other airports. Now, when you look at these companies, nothing seems to be common amongst these companies. But if you look under the hood, they have created successful businesses sustainable businesses through a culture of psychological safety. Their work environments have candor, engagement, collaboration, and risk-taking. And each one of us has done it in a different way. So Barry Wehmiller has a culture of care, compassion, and human connection. Tata Group has amazing culture of employee engagement and empowerment. Many of you would remember Howard did a case study on the 26/11 tragedy where terrorists attacked the hotel. Bridgewater, Ray Dalio, he manages the world's largest hedge fund and he believes in radical transparency. Google X encourages failure and you get bonus for failing. GMR Infra, openness and accountability for all. And each one of these is a fantastic case study and a learning experience in itself. But obviously, it's beyond the scope of today's webinar. But suffice it to say that these companies, in their own way, has created a culture of psychological safety. Okay. So here are two loops. One is the positive one and other is the negative one. So psychological danger. When people fear admitting mistakes, lack of psychological safety, they blame others, they hide mistakes, they are less likely to share different views, and then they suffer from what is known as common knowledge effect. You only make decisions from what you know, and there's a lot more that you don't know, which is never discussed. But then turn things around and move to the right hand side, the green loop, green cycle. So when problems come up, people have a positive, non-blaming, data-based perspective. They don't point fingers. They consider diverse ideas, relevant information, challenge each other. Mistakes are acknowledged and corrected immediately. And people approach one another with curiosity and a desire for more information than suspicion or need to find a fault. So in short, team members are fighting the external enemy together instead of wasting time in fighting one another. So that is the power of psychological safety. So as a leader, should you care about psychological safety? Can you take a few seconds to type yes or no? Do you think as a team member or a team leader, should you care about psychological safety? Share your thoughts, yes or no? So I believe the answers seem to be unanimous. Everybody thinks the answer is yes. Fantastic. Great, guys. So why should you care about psychological safety? So a few managers and leaders understand that the environment they create on their teams can make a difference between Boeing and Pixar, between failure and success, between surviving and thriving. It is a sustainable competitive advantage. So research has shown that teams that have psychological safety, a higher level, that outperform other teams who have lower level of psychological safety, even within the same organization. And this is true not only for frontline teams, it is also true for executive or C-suite teams. So progressive organizations now focus on psychological safety as a strategic advantage. So what do? They coach the leaders and the teams at all levels to nurture a climate of psychological safety. They don't promote someone unless they have demonstrated a track record of creating psychological safety. In fact, psychological safety is predictive of future success. So venture capitalists are using it, the psychological safety assessment, as a tool to evaluate risks when you are comparing, option one versus option two, which one is more likely to succeed? The one in which the core team has a high level of psychological safety. And in fact, in the last 3 or 4 years, psychological safety has gotten a lot of interest, especially after the 2016 article by Charles Duhigg on the Google's project that we discussed. And psychological safety still lacks in organization, and that is what study shows. So psychological safety is not something that is good to have or an employee perk. It is essential for sustainable performance for any organization in the 21st century. So as we had discussed earlier, psychological safety is like a dividend, and lack of it, it's like a tax.